Ancient empires, they had this threat coming from the sea. It could starve cities, it could topple kingdoms, and their response was a weapon of overwhelming scale. It was a forgotten naval armada. These colossal fleets, they were built for one clear mission: to eradicate piracy across the entire ancient world. And by the end, you'll see how these floating fortresses decided the fate of civilizations. Not through famous battles, but through silent patrols, relentless patrols, the kind that built the world we know. So how did a single Roman general clear the entire Mediterranean of pirates? In just 3 months. And why have these monumental efforts faded from memory? They kept economies alive. The answers show a hidden war, where controlling the waves meant survival. What does it take to tame a lawless frontier? The sea was that vital artery, the one thread everything depended on. And the pirates of that time, they weren't just robbers. They were like surgeons. They knew exactly where to cut. This wasn't about treasure. It was a cold economic fact. A single raid on a grain convoy could make the price of bread skyrocket in Rome or Athens. That could spark unrest. It could threaten a government's stability. What they were taking was life itself, food for cities, copper and tin for weapons, silver to pay soldiers, and then human lives, people to be sold. That last one is key to understanding the scale. For a lot of coastal towns, the bigger fear wasn't losing goods. It was losing people. A fishing village could wake up and find half its population gone, taken in the night to be sold far away. That constant vulnerability, it turned the sea from a highway into a frontier of fear. So these raiders, often they weren't outcasts, they were instruments. Many had the quiet blessing or even the direct funding of rival kingdoms. A king could weaken a competitor without declaring war. Just fund some privateers to choke their trade. Others were the displaced, the desperate, communities uprooted by war or famine. For them, a fast ship and knowledge of hidden coves was the only survival left. And some were sophisticated, syndicates running from remote, fortified harbors, places like Cilicia on the coast of what's now Turkey. Its coastline was a jagged maze. Inlets and hidden beaches, a perfect natural fortress where fleets could gather unseen. From places like that, their reach was immense. A merchant ship sailing from Egypt to Greece or from India to the Persian Gulf sailed with a calculated risk. The sea wasn't empty, it was watched. This pervasive insecurity left ancient leaders with a brutal choice. You could accept the constant drain, the lost taxes, the terrified citizens as just a cost of doing business, or you could decide to solve it permanently. But a temporary show of force wouldn't work. Chasing individual pirate ships was like trying to empty the ocean with a cup. The solution had to be as vast as the problem. It had to be systematic, permanent, overwhelming. A force that could dominate the sea lanes so completely the attacks would never even start. That decision, born from economic desperation and a need for absolute security, would create something new, a naval force designed not for conquest but for total control. The question was, what would that fleet even look like? It started on an island, Crete, in the Aegean over 4,000 years ago. The Minoans were the first to face this problem. They weren't building an empire on land. Their empire was the sea, a thalassocracy. Their wealth moved on ships, wooden hulls carrying copper from Cyprus, tin from the east, their own pottery to every port. But that wealth was always a target, so they did something new. They built a fleet, not for raiding, for guarding, the first organized peacekeeping force at sea. You see them in their art, frescoes, sleek, graceful vessels with rows of synchronized oars. These weren't the bulky transports that came later. They were fast, agile, built for one purpose: to be seen. Their presence on the horizon was the message, a guarantee. They patrolled the lanes between islands from Crete to Thera to the Greek coast. They created a bubble of security, so reliable we now call it the Pax Minoica, the Minoan peace, and it wasn't about punishing pirates after an attack. It was about making the attack unthinkable. Their naval power was a tool for economic stability. By making sure merchants could sail without fear, they made Crete the central hub for all trade. Prosperity followed, grand palaces at Knossos, at Phaistos, filled with art, with advanced plumbing, all funded by that secure flow of goods, so that's the blueprint. The first fleet built to stop piracy did it not with campaigns but with patrols, constant, reassuring patrols. Their goal was prosperity, not plunder. A network of safe water where commerce could flourish. That principle, that securing the sea was the key to wealth and stability, that became the mission for every great power that came after. But the Minoan model had a flaw, a fatal one. It depended entirely on the strength of a single center. When that center faltered, the peace shattered. And into that void stepped a new power, relentless, one that would take the idea of a policing fleet and scale it beyond anything imaginable. The Minoan peace was fragile. It couldn't last, and when it fell, the chaos that followed the ancient world hadn't seen anything like it. The sea became lawless again, but now the stakes were higher. Entire civilizations depended on those trade routes. The next power to face this threat understood something. The Minoans didn't see it. You couldn't just patrol the sea. You had to defend the land from the sea. That lesson was learned not on the open Mediterranean, but on the banks of the Nile. Ancient Egypt's power was the river. The Nile was their highway, their source of water, their god. For centuries, their naval focus was on these calm, predictable waters, elegant riverboats for ceremony and trade. But by the time of the New Kingdom, a new kind of storm was gathering on the horizon. They called them the Sea Peoples. Historians still debate exactly who they were. A coalition of displaced groups, warriors, and without a doubt raiders who lived by the sword and the oar. They moved in great migratory fleets, not just attacking ships but crashing into coastlines. They weren't just pirates, they were an existential threat, a force of upheaval that had already toppled kingdoms to the north. Pharaoh Ramesses III faced this crisis. At his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, he left a story carved in stone, one of the most detailed naval battle scenes from the ancient world. You can see it clearly. The Egyptian warships, with their distinctive high prows like floating fortresses, they're not out in the open ocean. They're positioned at the mouths of the Nile Delta, defending the door to Egypt itself. On deck, ranks of archers fire volley after volley into the chaotic mass of enemy vessels. The relief shows hands grasping in the water. Ships overturned, a scene of calculated, overwhelming defense. This was the evolution. Ramesses wasn't launching a campaign to chase pirates across the sea. He was using his fleet as a wall, a mobile, armed barrier. His victory was a masterpiece of interception. He understood the raiders' goal was to penetrate the delta, to sail up the Nile and strike the heart of Egypt, so he met them at the threshold. He turned the coastline into a trap. After this victory, the strategy became permanent. The pharaohs maintained constant patrols along the Nile and the Mediterranean coast. These ships were early warning systems, rapid response forces. Their job was to spot trouble far from the fertile fields and crowded cities, and to stop it before it could even begin. This proved a fundamental truth. Anti-piracy operations weren't a luxury for these ancient superpowers. They were the bedrock of national survival. The Egyptian model showed that a defensive fleet had to be inseparable from the land it protected. It was about controlling the point of contact, the vulnerable shoreline where the chaotic sea met the ordered civilization. But what happens when your civilization isn't a river valley with a single coastline to guard? What happens when your entire identity is the sea, and your enemy isn't a foreign armada, but a shadowy network hiding in 1,000 coves. The next power to face this challenge would need a different kind of fleet, one built for endurance, for persistence, and for the absolute domination of every wave. Athens was a city of philosophers, playwrights, but its survival depended on one fragile sea lane. Every year, grain ships came from the Black Sea, through the narrow straits, into the Aegean. That lifeline was under siege. Pirates from hidden island bases could strangle the city with a few raids. The choice was innovate or starve. Their answer was engineering and politics. The technological leap was the Trireme. This wasn't a slow warship, it was a predator, a sleek hull over 100 feet long. Powered by muscle, 170 oarsmen in 3 tiers, it could move in bursts of terrifying speed, turn on a coin. It was a maritime police cruiser. Built to hunt, it couldn't carry much, couldn't stay at sea for long, but it didn't need to. Its home was the network of friendly ports, the ports it protected. And that's where the political idea came in. Alone, Athens could build a fleet, but to patrol the whole Aegean, they needed a system. They formed the Delian League. A voluntary alliance at first, city-states pledging ships or money to a common treasury for collective security to clear the sea of Persians and of pirates. The money flowed in. Athens, as the leader, oversaw everything, built a standing navy. That alliance slowly became an Athenian empire. The fleet was its enforcing arm. The strategy became systematic. Under commanders like Cimon, the fleet didn't just react, it went to the source, island by island, targeting the pirate nests. The most famous operation was Syros, a notorious haven, rugged coastline, a perfect shield. Cimon's fleet didn't just win a battle, he took the island. Expelled the pirates, resettled it with loyal Athenians. He erased the problem, turned a lawless haven into a secured base, so the trireme was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of order. Its appearance meant safety for merchants, doom for raiders, and the Delian League showed that fighting piracy wasn't just military. It was logistical, diplomatic. It required a permanent, funded institution, a navy maintained not for a war but for an endless peace, a Pax Atheniana. But this system had a critical weakness. It was funded by tribute, enforced by one city. Resentment grew. The cost of security felt like oppression, and when Athens overreached. When that mighty fleet was destroyed far from home, the whole structure collapsed. The policed sea became a free-for-all again. The next power to face this chaos would learn from the innovation. And from the floor, they would build a fleet not on alliance but on absolute authority, and they would aim not to control a single sea, but to tame the entire known world. Sparta won, and then they had a problem. They beat Athens, and that meant the Aegean Sea was now theirs to manage. All these islands, all these shipping lanes. It was a whole world they didn't understand. Their strength was on land, in the phalanx. The sea was something else, but if they were going to lead, they had to deal with it. They didn't have a navy, not a real one. They didn't have the money for it, so they found a shortcut. They made deals. They put admirals in charge who used to be pirates themselves. Men who knew the coves, the routes, the tactics. They hired the fox to guard the hen house, and for a little while it worked. A man like Lysander, he knew how to be brutal. He knew how pirates thought. He could clear the sea lanes through fear, but that stability depended on him, on one man. When Lysander was gone, the system fell apart. The patrols stopped, the money ran out, and those former pirates without their Spartan pay, they often went back to what they knew. The peace was an illusion. It only lasted as long as Sparta was paying attention, and that wasn't very long. What it shows is you can't beat piracy by just winning a war or by making a temporary deal. It's a weed. It grows back the moment you stop tending the garden. To really stop it, you need something permanent, a real navy, ships, crews, command. Funded every year in peace and in war. Sparta couldn't do that, they wouldn't. So the calm they created was just a pause between storms. When they pulled back, the void they left was even bigger. The chaos got worse, trade suffered, cities were afraid, and that fear created a demand, a cry for a new kind of order, not a temporary fix, not a hired admiral. But absolute authority, the next power to rise, would hear that, and their answer wouldn't be to police the sea. It would be to erase piracy from it completely. Alexander's world broke into pieces. His generals divided the map, but they also inherited the same problem, a coastline that ran from Greece all the way to India. Trade routes that were now the lifelines of competing kingdoms, and the pirates, they were still there, just waiting. So in this new, divided world, the fight against piracy changed. It became professional, bureaucratic, a permanent expense on the royal ledger. Look at the Ptolemies down in Egypt. They were based in Alexandria, the biggest port anywhere. Their wealth came from the sea, grain from the Nile Valley shipped out to feed the Mediterranean, luxuries from the east coming up through the Red Sea. Every ship was a bag of gold floating on the water, and everyone knew it. Raiders from the Arabian coast, opportunists from Crete or Cyprus. The threat was constant, and it came from everywhere. Their solution was a permanent, standing force, the Ptolemaic fleet. This wasn't a fleet put together for an emergency. It was always there, docked in the great harbor of Alexandria, a forest of masts. A visible, daily reminder of the king's power and his guarantee of safe passage. What really made it different was the paperwork. We know from the records, from clay tablets and scrolls, that the Ptolemies ran their navy like a modern company. There were detailed logs, which ship was sent where and for how long, inventories of oars, sails, pitch for repairs, salaries for the rowers who were now paid professionals, not citizens drafted for service. The money came from a system of harbor taxes and customs duties. A tiny cut of every cargo that moved through their ports went straight to funding the fleet that protected it. It was a self-sustaining loop. Security paid for trade, and trade paid for security. Over in the vast Seleucid Empire, a similar system developed. Their challenge was even bigger. They had to police the coast of Syria, the Persian Gulf, the routes toward India. Their fleets were smaller, but they were placed in key positions, like a chain of fortresses on the water, controlling the narrow passages. The message to any merchant sailing from Babylon to the Mediterranean was clear. You sailed in Seleucid waters under Seleucid protection, for a fee, of course. This was the Hellenistic shift. The idea of a naval patrol went from a military campaign to a government service. It was integrated. The admiral reported to the treasurer. The shipwright reported to the quartermaster. That move from temporary heroism to boring, reliable administration, that's what finally built lasting security. It recognized that piracy wasn't a monster you killed once. It was a condition like crime in a city, and it needed a permanent police force. But this system, as efficient as it was, had a limit. It was regional. The Ptolemaic fleet guarded Ptolemaic interests. The Seleucid fleet guarded Seleucid routes. The Mediterranean wasn't one sea anymore. It was a patchwork of rival security zones, and in the gaps between them, in the unclaimed waters and along the coasts of weak client kings, the raiders found their space. They adapted. They became smugglers, moving goods to avoid the very taxes that funded the fleets chasing them. The professional navies kept the main lanes open, but they couldn't cover every shadowy cove. For that, you needed something more, a single power with the will and the resources to claim the entire sea as its own, to make the maritime police force not a department of a kingdom, but a force for the whole world. That ambition would soon rise from an unexpected place, not from a glittering Hellenistic capital, but from a city of farmers and soldiers, starting to understand its destiny was on the waves. Rome learned what happens when you ignore a coastline. This was a city built on land power, and the sea felt like someone else's problem until it was right there on their doorstep. The trouble came from the east, from Illyria, those rough shores across the Adriatic, and it wasn't just stories. Their ships, built for those shallow waters, started showing up off Italy. Raiding Apulia, taking Roman merchants captive, they were working out of fortified ports with their own queens and kings backing them. This was a direct challenge. A threat to Rome's sense of security. So Rome did the obvious thing. They sent a fleet. This was 229 BCE. A consular army crossed over, won some fights, and got a treaty signed. The Illyrians agreed to keep their ships north of a certain line. It looked like a success. Muscle flexed, problem solved, but it wasn't solved. They just treated a symptom. The cause was the coastline itself, all those inlets and hidden harbors, and it was the political structure. Raiding was how those kingdoms got wealth and power. The treaty just made them more careful for a bit. Within a generation, the raids started again. New rulers like Queen Tutor, who told Roman ambassadors that piracy was a perfectly lawful trade for her people. That led to another war, another Roman expedition, another victory, another temporary peace. That cycle: expedition, victory, relapse. That's what taught Rome the lesson. You couldn't fix piracy with one campaign. You couldn't fix it just at sea. The pirate ship was the tip of the spear, the shaft was the safe harbor, and the hand holding it was the local ruler who provided that harbor, who took a cut of the plunder, who gave them a market and a dock. So Rome changed the goal. It stopped being about punishing pirates. It became about removing the conditions that created them. In the mid-next century, after more broken treaties, Rome went back. This time, the campaign ended with annexation. Illyria became a protectorate, then a province. Roman soldiers garrisoned the ports. Roman governors took over administration. That rugged coast, the pirate's shield, was now under direct Roman control. That was the evolution. The Illyrian experience showed that real maritime security meant permanent occupation. Boots on the ground in the pirates' own homes, taking away their political sanctuary, turning their bases into yours. That was the logic Rome internalized. To control the sea, you first had to control the shore. And to control the shore, you sometimes had to conquer it. That principle, forged in the Adriatic, would soon get a much bigger test. One that would threaten the Republic itself. The lesson from Illyria was learned, but it wasn't being used. Rome thought it had the answer: control the coast, and you control the sea. But then a new threat emerged from a coast that was so rugged, so remote. It was like nature built it for rebellion. Cilicia. This jagged, mountainous coastline in southern Anatolia. To Rome's Senate, it was the end of the civilized world. To the men using its hidden coves, it was a perfect fortress. And by the 1st century BCE, that fortress had become the center of a crisis. This was beyond piracy now. It was like a shadow empire. The Cilician operation was different in scale, in how it worked. These weren't just lone raiders. It was a corporation, a syndicate with investors, with shipyards, a clear chain of command. Their harbors, places like Corasium, weren't just hideouts. They were full ports, markets, temples, docks for hundreds of ships. Their fleets weren't just raiding parties, they were organized squadrons. Some reports said their ships were bigger and faster than anything Rome's provincial navies had. They had spies in every port from Alexandria to Ephesus, telling them which convoy was leaving, what it carried when it was weakest. Their audacity was staggering. They didn't stay in the eastern Mediterranean. They sailed right into the heart of Roman power. They raided Ostia, the port at the mouth of the Tiber, burning ships at the docks within sight of Rome's walls. They kidnapped wealthy travelers from the Italian coast for ransom. Their most famous captive was a young nobleman heading to Rhodes to study, Gaius Julius Caesar. The story is, they set his ransom at 20 talents of silver. He laughed at them, he was insulted, told them he was worth at least 50. For 38 days he lived with them, writing poems, giving speeches, treating his captors with this cold, arrogant disdain. When the ransom was paid and he was freed, his last words were a promise, not a heated threat, just a calm fact. He said he would return and he would crucify every one of them. And he did later. He raised a fleet and hunted them down, but that was one man's revenge. The real problem was systemic. The true crisis was economic. The Cilician network had its hands around Rome's throat. Rome was a city of over 1 million people, fed by grain ships from Sicily, from North Africa, from Egypt. Those slow, heavy cargo ships were easy targets. The pirates didn't need to catch every ship, just enough. The fear alone made insurance vanish, sent shipping costs soaring, caused these periodic, terrifying shortages in the capital. The price of bread would spike, and the streets would fill with an angry, hungry mob. For the Roman Senate, this was the ultimate humiliation. The greatest power on land, held hostage by a criminal enterprise based on a rocky coast. It forced a brutal realization. Rome's old model, the provincial fleet, the occasional punitive expedition, it was broken. The Cilicians weren't a local nuisance for a governor to handle. They were a parallel state with a powerful navy, a vast spy network. They exposed the flaw in Rome's maritime strategy. There was no central command. No standing fleet whose only job was to secure the sea lanes. The Mediterranean wasn't a Roman lake. It was a lawless frontier, and in its darkest corners, a rival power was growing. The crisis needed more than another campaign. It demanded a rethinking of what naval power meant. It demanded a weapon of such force that the very idea of challenging Rome at sea would be erased. The stage wasn't set for a battle, it was set for an annihilation. The crisis had reached a breaking point. The Roman Republic had a choice: radical action or total collapse. In 67 BC, a tribune, Lex Gabinia, stood before the Senate. He proposed a law. It was so extreme it terrified them. The Lex Gabinia. It would change everything. This wasn't a normal military command. It was a complete reimagining of power. The law proposed giving one man that power, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. His authority would dwarf any general before him. His command covered the entire Mediterranean Sea, every wave, every current, and it went inland, 50 miles along every coast. From Spain all the way to Syria, geographically it was the largest command in Roman history, but the territory was only part of it. The tools he was given matched that scale. The law authorized a fleet, 500 warships, an army of 120,000 men, and a budget. It was essentially unlimited. The Senate, in its desperation, was creating something new. Not a provincial governor with a side duty. This was the first integrated, continent-spanning anti-piracy task force. Think about that. For decades, piracy was treated as a local crime. A nuisance for regional governors to handle when they had time. The Lex Gabinia declared that approach a failure. It redefined piracy. It was now a state of total war. A conflict that required a single response, a unified, overwhelming response. The political battle over this law was ferocious. Senators like Quintus Lutatius Catulus argued it was a dangerous precedent. Too much power in one man's hands. They weren't wrong, but the people of Rome were starving, grain shortages. They were terrified by raids on their own coast. They demanded action. The law passed, and with it, Pompey was handed an impossible mission: clear the entire Mediterranean, clear it of its most entrenched criminal network. And do it in a matter of months. He had the authority, he had the resources, now he had to prove it. Prove that centralized, overwhelming force could succeed. Where decades of piecemeal efforts had failed, the fate of Rome rested on his next move. The future of maritime security rested on it. Pompey knew he wasn't just chasing ships. He was taking apart a system, so his first move was to reject the chaos of the sea. He brought order to it. He drew a map. he divided the entire Mediterranean into 13 clear sectors. From Gibraltar all the way to the Syrian coast, each zone was a box on a grid. Each box had a trusted lieutenant, a specific squadron, a clear set of orders. That was the genius. He turned a vast, open frontier into a series of manageable, closed rooms. A pirate fleeing Roman ships in one sector wouldn't find refuge in the next. They'd just sail into another Roman squadron, already waiting, already informed. The net closed from all sides at once, but that naval pressure, it was only half the plan. Pompey knew force alone creates fugitives, not solutions. You could scatter them, but they'd regroup. So he paired the iron fist with an open hand. His heralds, his captured pirates, they carried a simple message. Surrender now and you will live. More than that, you'll get a chance to start over. Pirates who laid down their arms were offered land, fertile plots in remote places far from the coast. In Cilicia itself and further east, they were offered tools, security, a chance to become farmers, to build a life instead of plundering it. That offer of rehabilitation, it was a stroke of psychological warfare. It exploited a hidden truth. Many of these men weren't born raiders. They were the displaced, the desperate, victims of Rome's own earlier wars, its economic policies. Piracy was a profession of last resort. Pompey's clemency gave them a first resort, a way out with dignity, and it shattered the solidarity of the pirate bands. Why fight to the last man against an inevitable force when a peaceful future was being promised? The speed of it was breathtaking. While his lieutenants swept their sectors, Pompey himself led the main fleet west to east. He moved faster than information could travel. A pirate haven in Sicily hears rumors of Roman ships off Spain, then sees Pompey's own sails on the horizon the next morning. He cleared the western Mediterranean in 40 days. Then he pivoted east to the heart of the problem, Cilicia. The great fortified ports, expecting a long siege, found themselves isolated. Their networks were gone, their scouts captured, their potential allies had already surrendered, taken the deal. The final stronghold, Corasium, it fell not in a bloody last stand, but in a negotiated surrender. A campaign predicted to take years, over in 3 months. Pompey didn't just defeat the pirates, he made them vanish. He captured over 800 ships. He resettled thousands of former raiders inland. The sea lanes went quiet, eerily quiet. For the first time in living memory, a merchant could sail from one end of the Mediterranean to the other without hiring guards, without a prayer to Neptune. That victory reshaped everything. It proved security wasn't just about punishment. It was about removing the reason for the crime. It showed a military campaign could have a social policy at its heart. For Rome, it was a revelation. The sea was no longer a frontier. It was a Roman highway, and the man who policed it now held power that made the Senate deeply, deeply nervous. Pompey's victory was a masterstroke, but it was a campaign, a one-time effort. The question was how to make that security last, how to turn a 3-month miracle into something that lasted centuries. Augustus, the first emperor, looked at the peaceful sea Pompey created. He saw a vulnerability. That peace depended on one brilliant commander. Augustus wanted a system that didn't depend on heroes. He wanted machinery, permanent machinery, bureaucratic and reliable, so he built it. He established the Imperial Navy, the classis. It was a revolutionary idea. For the first time, a state maintained 2 massive permanent fleets, not primarily for war but for policing. The classis Missinensis was based at Misenum near Naples. It controlled the western Mediterranean. The classis Ravenus was based at Ravenna on the Adriatic. It controlled the east. These weren't just docks with ships. They were full military bases, barracks, training grounds, shipyards, administrative headquarters, cities dedicated to one purpose, keeping the sea lanes safe. The workhorse of this police force was the Liburnian. Think of it as the patrol car of the ancient world, smaller and lighter than the old Trireme. built for speed and agility, not massive naval battles. It required a smaller crew, which made it cheaper to operate, and it could chase down the sleek vessels smugglers or raiders might use. These Liburnians were constantly moving. Their job was visibility. A merchant sailing from Alexandria to Rome would see imperial warships at the mouth of the harbor, then again at key points along the coast. Finally, as an escort into the port of Ostia, their presence was a daily guarantee, a message in oak and sail. This sea is watched, but their role went beyond showing the flag. They were a full-service maritime authority. They escorted high-value convoys, especially the vital grain fleets from Egypt. They conducted anti-smuggling patrols, checking cargoes for contraband. They functioned as a rapid response force for coastal disturbances, and they hunted down the sporadic pirate bands that still tried to emerge, stamping out problems while they were still small. This created the true Pax Romana on the water, a peace built not on conquest alone, but on administration, relentless, boring, everyday administration. The security that let a Roman merchant in Gaul send a shipment of wine to Antioch, with a reasonable expectation it would arrive, that predictability was the foundation of the Roman economy. The genius of Augustus's system was its funding and its career structure. The fleets were paid for by imperial taxes, a line item in the state budget every year in peace and in war. And serving in them became a profession. Sailors signed up for 26 years. Upon honorable discharge, they received Roman citizenship and a cash pension. This created a corps of career mariners, experts in navigation, ship handling, law enforcement. Their loyalty was to the institution, to the emperor, to the stability their job provided. This wasn't a temporary militia called up in a crisis. It was a permanent civil service in uniform. That shift from temporary campaign to permanent institution is perhaps Rome's greatest legacy in the fight against piracy. It recognized a truth: you cannot have a civilized, interconnected world without a paid professional force to guard the connections. The classis demonstrated that lasting security isn't about the occasional grand gesture. It's about the unglamorous, ongoing work of maintenance, the dockworker repairing a hull, the clerk logging a patrol, the sailor on a night watch scanning a dark horizon. That system of bureaucratic permanence was so effective, it became invisible. For centuries, the Mediterranean was simply safe. So safe that the mighty fleets at Misenum and Ravenna, the backbone of this peace, slowly faded from the public mind. They became part of the background noise of a functioning empire. But when that machinery finally broke down, when the taxes stopped and the patrols ceased, the world would remember with terrible clarity what their quiet vigilance had truly cost. The Roman lake, the Mediterranean, was secure. That security created a problem. Peace there made another route much more attractive. The overland Silk Road was long, it was dangerous, it went through hostile empires like Parthia, but the sea route to India was open. For Roman merchants, that was the ultimate prize. Ships would leave from Egyptian ports like Berenice. They were loaded with gold and wine. They'd cross the Red Sea, they'd catch the monsoon winds, and they'd arrive on the coast of India. Months later, they'd return. Their holds were full of black pepper, cinnamon, silk, gems. The profits were astronomical. That kind of wealth moving across such lonely water, it was a beacon. The Red Sea and the Indian Ocean became the new frontier. Rome had to follow its money. This was a different kind of maritime space. The Mediterranean was a closed sea. You could often see the coasts. The Indian Ocean was an open expanse, a realm of monsoon winds and vast distances. Rome couldn't claim sovereignty here. They were just one player among many. Arabian kingdoms were there, Aksumite traders, Indian principalities. They all shared these waters, so Rome's approach had to be different. More diplomatic, more about influence than outright control. They established what you could call a security partnership. Their first concern was the Red Sea itself. That narrow finger of water separating Egypt from Arabia. Its coasts were barren, rugged, perfect for ambush. Local tribes, expert sailors, they saw the slow, heavy Roman merchant ships as gifts from the gods. To counter this, Rome didn't build a massive fleet stationed in the Red Sea. That was logistically impossible. Instead, they kept a standing patrol force. Probably based out of ports like Myos Hormuz, their job was to sweep the sea lanes, especially the narrow southern exit into the Indian Ocean, a notorious choke point for pirates. But their real genius was in their alliances. On the southern tip of Arabia, in the region they called Arabia Felix Fortunate Arabia, there were wealthy kingdoms. Like the Himyarites, these kingdoms controlled the frankincense and myrrh trade. They had their own powerful navies. Rome made them clients. They offered trade privileges. Political support probably shared intelligence. In return, these client kings used their local knowledge. They used their fleets to help police the approaches to the Indian Ocean. They suppressed pirate havens on their own coasts. They created a safe corridor for Roman shipping. It was an early form of outsourcing maritime security. Outsourcing it to a trusted local partner. We know the details of this fragile system from a remarkable document, not an imperial decree, a merchant's handbook. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, written in the 1st century, it's a practical guide for a ship's captain sailing from Egypt to India. It lists ports, what to trade, what dangers to avoid, and woven through its dry advice is a constant theme: security. It notes which harbors are safe and well administered. It notes which stretches of coast are infested with pirates. It tells the merchant which local ruler is friendly, which one might shake you down. This document only exists because there was a system stable enough to make such a predictable guide possible. The patrols, the alliances, they created just enough order for commerce to flow across thousands of miles of open ocean. This shows something about the ancient anti-piracy armada. Its concept was already global. It wasn't just about controlling a single sea you owned. It was about projecting security into spaces you didn't own. Protecting economic interests across vast, open waters where no single power held complete sovereignty. The Roman Empire, for all its might, understood it couldn't police the Indian Ocean alone. So it built a network, a combination of limited naval presence, local alliances, economic incentive. The goal was the same as in the Mediterranean, not to conquer the ocean, but to make it predictable, to turn a lawless frontier into a calculated risk. That challenge, protecting trade without controlling the territory it crosses. It's a puzzle every great trading power since has faced, right up to the modern day. Rome had the western routes secured, but the real center of Indian Ocean trade was on the other side. The west coast of India, it was all ports, and the kingdoms there, they knew their power came from the sea. Up north, you had the Kushan Empire. They held the overland Silk Road from Central Asia into the Ganges Plain. But they also looked south. Their wealth wasn't just from caravans, it came from ships, from ports like Barbaricum, right at the mouth of the Indus River. That's where Roman gold came in and Indian spices went out. That port was a treasury, and a treasury needs guards. Further south, on the Deccan Plateau, the Satavahana dynasty ruled. Their power was tied directly to the Arabian Sea. Their major ports, Barach, Kalyan, these weren't just markets, they were fortresses. You can see the remains. Massive stone walls, watchtowers over the harbors, warehouses built like strongholds. This wasn't for decoration, it was a response to a constant threat. The same monsoon winds that brought merchants from Rome and Arabia also brought raiders. Fast ships from hidden coves could hit a merchant vessel on its final approach. Losing a ship wasn't just a loss of cargo, it was a hit to the king's treasury, which lived on customs duties. It was a challenge to his authority, so these Indian empires did what trading powers do. They built fleets. We don't have ship lists like Rome's classes, but the evidence is in the stones, in inscriptions. The Satavahanas left records praising kings who protected the oceans, who made the waters safe for righteous travel. This wasn't poetry, it was policy. Their navies patrolled the coastal lanes from the Gulf of Combat down to the Malabar coast. Hunting pirates wasn't foreign policy. It was a municipal service. A merchant, whether from a Satavahana village or a Roman galley, he paid his taxes at Barach. And in return, the king's ships made sure that merchant could sail from Barach to the next port without being robbed. This created a system, a relay race of safe passage. A Roman ship leaves Egypt under the guard of the classes. It crosses the Arabian Sea. It arrives off the Indian coast, and then the security guarantee shifts. It's the Kushan or Satavahana navy that takes over. Their local knowledge was everything. They knew the inlets where raiders hid. They knew the seasonal patterns. They provided pilots to guide foreign ships through dangerous river mouths to safe harbor. This was anti-piracy as a shared interest. The Roman merchant, the Satavahana king, the Kushan tax collector, they all wanted the same thing. For pepper to get from the Indian hills to a Roman table, that long chain only worked if every link was secure. No single empire could police the whole route. So each one policed their own segment, creating a continuous corridor of guarded water. In that light, the war on piracy becomes less about conquest, more about infrastructure. It was maintenance for the ancient world's network, a system that only worked if the ships, the data, could move without being intercepted. That cooperation across huge cultural distances shows something. Commerce has always been a unifier. It could align the interests of empires that never met, that worshipped different gods, that spoke unrelated languages. The safe passage of a ship was a universal value because the alternative was a return to isolation, to scarcity, to a world where the riches of India stayed a legend. The guardians of the Indian coast weren't just protecting their shores, they were upholding a silent pact between civilizations. A pact written not on parchment but observed in the wake of their patrol ships. The Han Dynasty, far to the east, had the same problem. Their whole civilization was built on water. The Yellow River, the Yangtze, the coastline, these were their roads. They moved grain north to the capital, silk to the markets, and that movement of wealth, it drew in raiders. They called them the Waku. That name would last. Early Waku, they weren't only from Japan, they were a mix. Fishermen with nothing, people pushed off the Korean peninsula, local bandits. They used the coastal islands, all those inlets, as a base. A raid could shut down a province. Fast boats hitting a riverside granary, burning merchant ships, gone into the fog before anyone even knew. The Han response wasn't a short campaign. It was built into the land. They put up chains of watchtowers along the coast, not just lookouts, fortified signal stations with soldiers. If a sentry saw sails, he lit a beacon. The next tower would see it, light its own. A wave of fire down the coast, warning garrisons and ports long before the raiders landed. An early warning system made of stone and flame, but a warning isn't enough. You have to meet them on the water, so Han shipbuilders designed for that. The most powerful were the Lu Chuan, the tower ships. These weren't for the open ocean. They were floating fortresses for rivers and coasts. Descriptions say they had multiple decks, like a wooden skyscraper on its side. The lower decks held the rowers. The upper decks were for crossbowmen and archers. From that height, they could fire down on the smaller raiding boats. Attacking a tower ship was like attacking a moving castle wall. They had faster patrol ships too, but the tower ship was the statement, overwhelming control. This navy had a clear job. Commanders were given sectors to patrol. Their orders: find and destroy pirate bases on the islands, keep the inland waterways clear. This was crucial for the Grand Canal, that artificial river connecting the Yellow and Yangtze. It was the empire's spine. The South's rice went north through it to feed the capital. A single bandit group blocking a section could cause a crisis, so the canal itself was patrolled. Garrison posts at the locks and junctions. You see a deep parallel here with Rome. An empire built on land, realizing its survival depended on the water. They both reached the same answer, not a temporary fleet, a permanent institution. A navy inside the imperial bureaucracy, state-funded, with a daily duty, police work. The hand didn't want to conquer the sea, they wanted to make it predictable. To turn their rivers and coasts from a frontier into secure domestic space. This same idea, developing independently, from the Mediterranean to the Yellow Sea, it tells you something. When a state gets large and complex, when its cities depend on grain from far away, the security of trade routes stops being a local matter. It becomes the central project of the state. The patrol boat, the watchtower, the professional sailor, these aren't signs of militarism, they're tools of economic integration, the quiet machinery that lets an empire exist. And as one empire perfected this system, another would rise in those same waters, turning the hunter into the hunted. Rome's machinery broke down, but the sea was still there. The empire in the east, the Byzantine Empire, it inherited the Mediterranean, and it inherited the same old threat, only now that threat had a new face. The Arab conquests in the 7th century, they changed the map on land, and they also unleashed a new naval power onto the sea. Fast fleets from Syria and Egypt, they started raiding the Byzantine coast. The old Roman system, it had two central fleets. They were too slow, too far away. An enemy could strike an undefended coast and vanish before word even got to the capital. The empire needed a new model. It needed it fast, and the answer didn't come from the grand docks in Constantinople. It came from the provinces, sometime in the 7th century, under emperors like Heraclius or the ones who came after. They created something new. The Carabissionoi, the name means the men of the ships. This was the first naval theme. A theme was a military district. Soldiers were given land to farm. In return, they formed a local army ready to fight. The Carabissionoi took that idea and applied it to the sea. It was a fleet-based army, stationed permanently along the southern coast of Asia Minor, what's now Turkey. These weren't sailors reporting to a distant admiralty. They were local men defending their own shores, their own homes. They knew every cove, every current, every seasonal wind. When Arab raiders appeared, the Carabissionoi could respond in hours, not weeks. This was a decentralization of naval power. Security was embedded right into the fabric of the province. But they needed the right tool for the job, and that tool was the dromon, the sprinter. It was the Byzantine evolution of the Roman Liburnian, a sleek, fast Trireme galley. Powered by two banks of oars, but its true terror was its armament. At its bow, it carried a bronze tube, a siphon, and from that tube it could project the empire's most guarded secret. Greek fire, a liquid flame that clung to water, that couldn't be put out. To a pirate in a wooden ship, the sight of a dromon turning toward you, its siphon glowing, that was a nightmare. It was less a battle, more an eradication. The system proved itself. The success of the Carabissionoi led to more naval themes, the Sibirhiat theme for the southern coast, the Aegean Sea theme for the islands. Each was a self-sufficient defensive command. A governor-admiral controlled both the fleet and the coastal lands that supported it. Taxes from those lands paid for the ships. The sons of those lands crewed them. It was a sustainable loop. The Byzantine Empire, it was smaller than Rome. But it created a more resilient maritime shield, a network of regional firewalls. If one was breached, the others held. This Byzantine continuity, it's a lesson. When the old central power faded, they didn't abandon maritime security. They reinvented it for a more dangerous, fragmented world. they proved that protecting a trading empire wasn't about having one unbeatable fleet. It was about having a system, a distributed system, where local knowledge and local commitment were the greatest weapons. The dromon and Greek fire, they were the spectacular tools. But the real innovation was the theme, the idea that the best guardians of the coast are the people who live there. This model of regional naval commands, it would echo for centuries. But even the most resilient defense can be worn down by a relentless, changing tide. The Byzantines were guarding their sea as it got smaller, but a much older power had already figured out how to run a sea for money. Carthage, this was long before Rome. Their empire wasn't about taking land. It was about what was in the ships, a trade network from North Africa over to Spain. Sardinia, down the Atlantic coast of Africa, all their wealth moved on the water, so their biggest concern was keeping those ships safe. Their navy, the one that fought Rome, that was really a security force. For a commercial empire, its main job wasn't fighting other navies every day. It was making sure a merchant ship got from Carthage to a tin mine in southern Spain. Without being touched, that demanded a different approach. You can't patrol the whole Western Mediterranean. It's just too vast, so they thought about control. Not of the open sea, but of the places ships have to pass through, the choke points, the islands. Any pirate ship needs a place to hide to get water. To repair its hull, Carthage took those places away. They took key islands and fortified them. Sardinia, that long, ragged coast, became a stronghold. Not just for resources, a naval base. From there, patrols could watch the lanes between Africa and Italy. The Balearic Islands off Spain, another crucial point. They had slingers, yes, but they were a strategic hub. Controlling them meant Carthage dominated the routes along Spain. The approach to Gibraltar, it was a strategy of denial. Turn every possible pirate haven into a Carthaginian port. You squeeze the life out of maritime crime. A raider has nowhere to run, nowhere to resupply. No coast to sell what they've stolen. The sea became their controlled space, not because they sailed all of it, but because they owned all the doors. Their merchant convoys became very secure. They could move silver, tin, purple cloth with a confidence others envied. Their navy enforced that peace. A visible guarantee that the rules of Carthaginian trade would be followed. It shows a brutal efficiency in ancient anti-piracy. Sometimes the most powerful armada isn't the one chasing the pirate. It's the one that owns the island the pirate needs to survive. Securing commerce wasn't about heroic battles at sea. It was about the quiet domination of the coastline. A lesson in economic geography used as military strategy. For centuries, it made them the masters of the Western Sea, until another power came up, one that would study their methods. And then build something even larger. That edge in technology was everything. A pirate's advantage was surprise and speed, so the state's warship had to be faster, tougher, more terrifying. It became a quiet arms race, not between empires but between order and chaos on the water. It started with the hull. The Minoan galley, with its shallow draft and long lines, could cut through calm Aegean seas, chasing down slower merchant ships turned raider. But chasing wasn't enough. You had to stop them. The Greeks introduced the ultimate tool for that, the bronze ram, mounted at the waterline of a trireme. It wasn't for boarding, it was a precision instrument. A trained crew would row at full speed, aiming to slam that hardened beak into an enemy ship's side. The goal was to punch a hole below the waterline and back away, leaving the ship to fill and sink. The sound alone was a weapon, the shuddering crack of timber, the screams. A pirate captain knew one clean hit from a trireme meant his ship, his livelihood, his crew were gone in minutes. But rams needed open water and a perfect charge. For the close quarters fights that often decided these battles, you needed a different toolkit. This is where the ship became a floating platform for infantry. Roman Liburnians and Byzantine dromons carried marines. These weren't just sailors with swords, they were professional soldiers adapted to the unstable deck of a ship. Their arsenal was designed for a single transition, from sea to land. First, missile weapons. Archers and javelin throwers would rain down projectiles, thinning the enemy ranks before the ships even touched. Then came the grapnels, heavy iron hooks on ropes hurled across the gap to snag the enemy's railings. A crew would haul back, pulling the two vessels together with a jarring crash. Now the sea battle ended and the land battle began. Marines would swarm across, fighting shield to shield on a deck slick with water and blood. The goal was capture, not just sinking. To take the pirate ship intact and its crew alive for questioning. Yet one invention transcended all the others. It was the ancient equivalent of a strategic deterrent. Greek fire, a Byzantine state secret so closely guarded its exact recipe, died with the empire. We know it was a liquid pumped through tubes mounted on the prows of dromons. When ignited, it shot out in a roaring stream of fire that clung to everything it touched. Water couldn't extinguish it. It burned on the waves themselves. Imagine being a pirate helmsman, seeing a dromon turn toward you, its strange nozzle glowing. Then a jet of liquid flame arcs across the water, coating your sails, your deck, your comrades. The sea around you seems to catch fire. There was no defense. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a message that the empire held a power from the gods themselves. The mere rumor of a dromon squadron could clear a coastline for months. This push for better ships and deadlier tools shows us something. The anti-piracy fleet was never a static force. It was a laboratory. Each innovation in speed, like the Liburnian, was a response to pirates finding faster boats. Each new weapon, from the ram to Greek fire, was an answer to their tactics. The state had to stay several steps ahead. This technological competition, driven by the daily need to police the seas, accelerated naval science for centuries. The lessons learned in hunting pirates shaped the warships that would later decide the fate of empires in set peace battles. But technology alone couldn't hold an empire together. It required something more fundamental and far more fragile. The strength of a dromon or a trireme. It didn't matter if the crew was starving. A fleet, that big beast of war, it was a creature of pure consumption. It ate through supplies at a terrifying rate. A single Roman quinquereme with 300 rowers, 50 marines and sailors. Every day, it needed over a ton of grain just for the men. Then there was fresh water, which spoiled quickly at sea. Sails ripped, oars snapped, hulls sprang leaks from constant patrols. An armada wasn't just a weapon. It was a moving city with endless hungry needs. And feeding that Leviathan, that was the true, hidden war behind the war. This is where the real genius of empires showed itself. Not in battle, but in bureaucracy. Take the Roman naval base at Misenum. It wasn't just a harbor. It was an industrial complex dedicated to sustaining power at sea. A vast protected bay, on one side sprawling barracks housing thousands of sailors and their families. Next to them, the granaries, massive stone warehouses holding enough wheat to feed the fleet for months. Then the ship sheds, long covered ramps where galleys were hauled out of the water for repairs. Teams of carpenters, rope makers, metal workers, toiling constantly. The smell of pitch and sawdust hung in the air. This base was a machine. Its sole product was readiness. But that machine needed fuel from hundreds of miles away. The supply chains were the empire's silent lifelines. The tall, straight fir trees for masts came from the forests of the Apennines or the Balkans. They were felled, dragged to rivers, floated to the coast, loaded onto barges. The flax for sailcloth was grown in Egypt, woven into fabric in workshops, shipped across the Mediterranean. The iron for anchors and rams was mined in places like Elba, smelted, transported. Every nail, every length of rope, every amphora of wine for the officers' rations. It represented a long, vulnerable journey over land and sea. A single break in that chain could immobilize an entire squadron. This immense back-end infrastructure, it reveals a truth. Launching an anti-piracy campaign was a military decision, but sustaining it was an economic and administrative masterpiece. It required tax collectors gathering coin from provinces. It required quartermasters who could forecast needs months in advance. It required diplomats ensuring safe passage for supply convoys through allied territories. The admiral commanding the fleet was only as powerful as the clerk tracking the inventory of grain in a warehouse in Naples. This made geography a matter of survival. A fleet could only operate as far and as long as its supply lines allowed. That's why controlling friendly ports wasn't just a tactical advantage, it was the entire strategy. Every secure harbor along a coast was a stepping stone, a place to take on fresh water, repair storm damage, let exhausted crews rest. The Phoenicians understood this, fortifying islands like Sardinia. The Romans perfected it, creating a network of secondary bases and way stations. The patrol ship you saw on the horizon, it wasn't just a guardian of trade. It was the final, visible link in a chain that stretched back to mines, forests, and farms deep inland. The real battle against piracy was won not on the waves, but in the ledgers and the granaries. In the quiet, relentless work of keeping the Leviathan fed, the fleet was blind. A warship could only see to the horizon. A pirate could see it first and then just disappear. To change that, empires had to build something invisible, a web of information across the sea, an ancient intelligence network, and the first nodes in that network weren't soldiers. They were the people who lived on the water. The merchant captain, whose livelihood depended on safe passage, had every reason to report something strange. The fisherman, who knew every rock and current of his local coast, could spot a strange sail in a hidden cove long before any official patrol saw it. These men became informal informants. In Roman ports, later in Byzantine harbors, there were officials. The portator, the commerciarios, their job was to collect customs but also to gather news. A merchant arriving in port would report what he'd seen: unusual ship activity, an abandoned village, a new dock on a deserted island. This casual debriefing was the lifeblood of naval intelligence. It created a collective map of threats drawn from 1,000 voyages, but those human reports moved at the speed of a ship. To catch a fast raider, information had to move faster. Much faster. That's where the infrastructure came in. Along the coastlines, empires built chains of watchtowers. The Romans called them pharai or burgi. The Byzantines perfected it. These weren't just lookout posts, they were relay stations, perched on headlands. Each tower was in sight of the next. Their method was simple. During the day, columns of smoke. At night, controlled fire. A pre-arranged signal, 1 puff, 2 puffs, a sustained blaze, could convey a simple message. Ships approaching, many ships, hostile sails. The signal would leap from tower to tower, traveling at the speed of light over land. A message that might take a ship a day to carry could reach headquarters in hours. This allowed for a shift. Fleets no longer had to react, they could anticipate. A signal from a tower on the Lycian coast could alert the Sibyhiot-themed fleet while the pirate ships were still miles out. The dromons could be launched not to chase a ghost but to intercept a known target. They could be waiting at the mouth of a bay, ready to cut off a retreat. The vastness of the ocean, the pirate's greatest shield, was being filled with invisible lines of sight, swift currents of information. This network turned geography into a trap. A pirate captain might think he was striking an undefended village, but from the moment his sail was spotted by a shepherd on a hill or a farmer who ran to the nearest tower, the mechanism was in motion. His escape route was being calculated in a distant command post by men looking at maps, reading the latest tower signals. The campaign was no longer just a contest of strength on the waves. It was a contest of knowledge. The state, with its network of observers and its rapid signaling, began to see the sea as a chessboard. They could see moves before they were made. That intelligence advantage was perhaps the most decisive weapon. It meant the armada didn't need to be everywhere at once. It just needed to be in the right place at the right time. And knowing that right place required listening to the whispers of the sea carried on the wind and the smoke. The power of a patrol ship was really about money. Not the treasure it took, but the wealth it let happen. For an empire, those big fleets were never just a military cost. They were an investment, the most important piece of economic structure you could build. Piracy was a tax, a violent, unpredictable tax on anything that moved by sea. It turned trade into a gamble. A merchant would load his ship with olive oil, knowing the whole cargo could be gone by afternoon. That risk had a price. There was maritime insurance in a basic form. A merchant could pay a financier a premium. If the ship was lost, the financier paid. But if pirates were everywhere, that premium went sky high, or the financier just said no, the cost to move goods would soar, and that cost got passed on. The price of Egyptian wheat in Rome, the price of Indian pepper in Alexandria, the price of Spanish silver in Carthage, all of it got more expensive because the journey was dangerous. A permanent navy changed that. When Roman warships became a common sight, the risk premium dropped. Merchants could plan. They could calculate profits based on known costs, not on potential disaster. That predictability changed everything. It allowed for scheduled, regular trade, the kind complex economies need. The best example is the Roman grain dole, the annona. Every month, the state gave free wheat to hundreds of thousands in Rome. That system was the base of urban peace and political stability, but it was a house of cards. It rested on one fragile idea, that the grain fleets from Egypt and North Africa would arrive on time, every time. A single pirate group hitting those convoys didn't just mean hunger. It meant riots, the collapse of order, the end of an emperor. The whole annona system and Rome's stability with it was a product of naval security. The fleet wasn't protecting ships, it was protecting the social contract. This logic worked everywhere. In the Indian Ocean, the safe lanes kept by Roman patrols meant a merchant in Musaris could sell pepper to a Roman agent with confidence. He knew the Roman gold would come. He knew his goods would reach the market. That reliability built long-term partnerships. It created markets for things that were once impossible luxuries. Chinese silk became common enough in Rome for senators to complain about it. Spanish fish sauce was a staple in Pompey. This wasn't just more trade. It was globalization, the ancient version, a world connecting because the connections were safe. For the treasury, the math was obvious. Safe seas meant more ships. More ships meant more customs duties at every port. More goods moving meant more sales taxes, more activity to tax. The cost of the fleet, the wages, the timber, the food was huge. But the tax revenue from the commerce it protected was far, far bigger. The anti-piracy fleet was the ultimate profit center. It paid for itself many times over, funding the empires it served. Every sea power from Athens to Carthage understood this. You didn't build a navy despite the cost. You built it because of the profit. The quiet hum of a trade economy, the lifeblood of everything, needed one thing above all. The certain, silent promise of a guarded sea. That power to feed a city was also the power to starve it. The admiral with the fleet had a knife to Rome's throat. When Pompey came back after 3 months, he didn't just bring peace. It was a political earthquake. The Lex Gabinia had given him more authority than anyone. An army, a fleet, a budget with no limit, and he'd succeeded. That success created a new equation: military glory plus control of the capital's lifeline. That was a formula for supreme influence. So his next move was to take that naval triumph and turn it into a command against Mithridates further east. His career became a kind of blueprint: secure the sea and the grain, and the people hand you the keys to the state. This wasn't just ambition, it was a structural shift. The state had built a machine so powerful that the man running it could overshadow the state itself. A proconsul with a loyal fleet controlling the Egyptian grain route, he didn't just command soldiers. He commanded the mood of the forum. He could ensure calm, or he could allow a shortage to destabilize a rival. The navy, built to protect the republic, had become a tool that could undermine it. And this power went beyond the grain dole. Out in the provinces, a naval commander was the face of Roman authority. His ships were mobile symbols of Roman law. For the local elite in a port city, Ephesus, Alexandria, the fleet's presence meant their warehouses were safe, their shipping contracts were secure, their profits were guaranteed. The navy protected the commercial interests of the empire's wealthiest class. It bound their loyalty to Rome not through ideology, but through economic security. For a common fisherman, though, a coastal farmer, the sight of a Liburnian could mean different things. It might mean safety from raiders, but it could also mean a press gang looking for rowers, or inspectors demanding new harbor taxes to fund the very fleet that policed them. The armada was an instrument of social control. It ensured the smooth flow of wealth upward to the center. Maybe the most lasting change happened on land. Remember Pompey's policy of clemency. He didn't execute the pirates he captured. He resettled them. Thousands of men with their families moved from their rocky coves in Cilicia to new towns inland. Places like Soli, which he renamed Pompeiopolis. This was demographic engineering. He took a population defined by maritime lawlessness and turned them into inland farmers. Taxpayers, he erased their old identity and gave them a stake in the Roman system. Suddenly, regions that were once hinterlands, pirate nurseries, became quiet agricultural districts. The human geography of the entire coast changed. A problem of people was solved not by annihilation, but by relocation, assimilation. That practice echoed elsewhere. The Imperial Navy itself became an engine of social mobility. Serve for 25 years and a sailor, often recruited from the poorest non-citizen classes, got the coveted prize. Roman citizenship for himself and his sons. The navy was a ladder. It transformed outsiders into invested members of the Roman world. So the Forgotten Armada did more than clear sea lanes. It reshaped the political landscape, concentrating dangerous power in the hands of military heroes. It solidified the economic hierarchy, protecting the assets of the powerful. And it remade societies, pirates into farmers, provincials into citizens. The relationship between the state and the individual was rewritten, in part, by the need to keep the seas safe. The vessel of security became a vessel of transformation. And as that transformation settled into the bedrock of empire, the very success of these fleets began to hide their cost. A cost that would only become visible when the money finally ran out. The fleet wasn't just timber and oars, it was an idea, and an idea like that needed a story. A story strong enough to make men row into battle, to make citizens pay for it. So states reached for their oldest language, the language of myth. They wove their naval power right into the sacred tales. Into gods and heroes, they turned a practical necessity into a kind of divine destiny. Athens was the city of intellect, but it was also the city of Athena. Their patron goddess wasn't just wise, she was a warrior, and her gift to the city wasn't just the olive tree, it was the ship. In their art, in their ceremonies, they linked their trireme fleet to her favor. To sail under Athena's protection was to carry civilization itself across the waves. They claimed an older hero for this, too, Theseus. Before he faced the Minotaur, the legends said he cleared the coastal road to Athens of bandits. The storytellers expanded that. They said he cleared the surrounding seas of pirates. and that was the perfect model, the heroic strongman making the waters safe for decent people. By linking their naval campaigns to Theseus, the Athenians framed their actions not as imperial policing, but as the continuation of a heroic mission. A civilizing mission that began in the age of myth. It justified their dominance, it made their fleet an instrument of a higher order. Rome mastered this. An emperor's power was absolute, but it had to feel inevitable, divine, so they borrowed the imagery of Neptune, god of the sea. Coins across the empire show emperors like Hadrian or Commodus in a pose identical to the sea god. Standing 1 foot on a ship's prow, holding a trident, the message was clear. The emperor didn't just command the navy, he was the master of the oceans. His will brought calm to the chaotic waters. A monument might show him towering over bound figures representing conquered coastal tribes or ocean deities. This was propaganda in marble and bronze. It transformed the hard work of the classis, the patrols, the battles into a cosmic drama. The emperor, like a god, was imposing pax, peace, on the primordial chaos of the sea. The bloodshed and expense became a sacred duty, a necessary step in the divine project of Roman order. This narrative was a powerful tool. It turned sailors into holy warriors. It turned taxpayers into patrons of a cosmic struggle. The enemy was no longer just a desperate raider in a fast boat. He was an agent of chaos, an enemy of the gods themselves. Fighting him was a righteous act. Dying in that fight was a sacred sacrifice. This cultural framing served a brutal economic logic. It was far easier to ask a farmer in Gaul or a merchant in Syria to fund a fleet fighting pirates than to fund a fleet securing the grain supply for Rome. The myth elevated the mundane. It made protecting a trade route feel like fulfilling a prophecy. In that light, the Forgotten Armadas achieved a kind of immortality. They sailed not only on water but into the story a civilization told about itself. They became characters in the epic of order versus chaos. Their success was proof of divine favor. Their very existence was a testament to a state's right to rule. The creak of the oars, the billow of the sail, these were the sounds of a civilization performing its most sacred myth. The myth that it could tame the wild, not just on land but on the endless, restless sea. And when that performance faltered, the silence that followed would tell a different story altogether. The silence on the water was their biggest success and also their final curse. You don't remember the god who stops the crime. The peace these fleets created, that peace wrote them out of history. For generations, a merchant could sail the whole Mediterranean without a second thought. The sea was just safe. That deep, boring normalcy was what they left behind. It became background noise for civilization, so constant it wasn't even noticed. When something works perfectly, it becomes invisible. The endless patrols, the supply convoys, the night watch, all that was the cost of a peace so total it felt like a law of nature. Who builds a monument to an absence? The people writing the histories then. They were almost all men of the land, senators, scholars, priests. Their world was legions marching, territories conquered, politics in the forum. The navy was a utility, a service department. Its victories weren't the stuff of epic poetry. There was no great singular battle of Misenum. There was just maintenance. An admiral who spent his career making sure the grain fleet arrived on time every year. He left no thrilling memoir. He left ledgers, and ledgers, however vital, they aren't the stuff of legend. So we have detailed accounts of Caesar's land campaigns, but the daily work of the classis missinensis, that's in dry administrative papyri, fragments found in Egyptian trash heaps. Not in the grand histories on library shelves. Then the collapse came. When an empire's central authority crumbles, the tax revenue stops first, and the first thing you defund is the most expensive, complex machine in the state, the standing navy. An army could live off the land, could become a local warlord's personal force. But a fleet can't eat its own ships without a constant flow of money for pay, for timber, for pitch and sailcloth. It rots at the docks. The great dromons of the Byzantine themes were pulled ashore and left to become firewood. The great harbors at Misenum and Ravenna silted up, their granite quays sank into the mud. A stone fort on a hill can stand for 1,000 years, a silent witness. A warship is organic. It returns to the earth in a generation, leaves just a vague stain in the sediment, a scatter of bronze nails. The naval armada left few grand ruins to inspire awe later. Its monuments were the safe voyages that left no trace at all, so memory filled the void with a more compelling character. The pirate, the rebel, the free spirit defying the monolithic state, that's the story we've chosen to tell. From the ancient Cilician to the Caribbean buccaneer, the narrative is romantic individualism against cold, imperial control. We see the adventure, the defiance. We seldom ask what life was like for the coastal villager living in terror of the next raid, for the merchant ruined by a single ambush. The systematic, bureaucratic, profoundly unglamorous work of creating security, it lacks that romantic sheen. It's easier to mythologize the outlaw than the bureaucrat. The rebel than the patrolman. We remember the chaos, not the order that restrained it. This bias hides one of antiquity's most stunning organizational triumphs. To coordinate the building, supplying, and deployment of these fleets across vast distances, that required a sophistication we rarely give the ancient world credit for. It was a logistical ballet, a masterpiece of applied administration that made intercontinental trade and city life possible. That they succeeded so well they erased the evidence of their own necessity. That might be their most ironic tribute. They built a world so secure it forgot the architects of its safety, but in that forgetting we lost a key to understanding how civilizations truly hold together. Not through moments of heroic conquest, but through the sustained, quiet effort of keeping the connections open. That deep silence they created, it's the foundation our world is built on. You look at any modern map of the ocean, those lines drawn 200 miles from every coastline, the exclusive economic zones, that concept isn't new. It's a direct descendant of the Roman claim to control their coastal waters, the 50-mile authority they gave to Pompey, the ancient principle that a state is responsible for the security of the waters that sustain it. That never went away. It just evolved. The Roman classis, the Byzantine themes, they were in essence the first permanent coast guards. Their mission wasn't to fight other nations. It was to enforce law, rescue the distressed, ensure safe passage. That exact mission statement is echoed by the cutters and patrol boats of modern nations today. The vessel changed from a wooden galley to a steel-hulled ship with radar, but the core duty, the daily grind of watchful presence, that remains unchanged. Consider the convoy system. During the World Wars, groups of merchant ships were shepherded by warships across the Atlantic to evade submarines. That tactic was lifted straight from antiquity. The Roman grain fleets from Egypt didn't sail alone. They moved in organized flotillas escorted by Liburnians. The Byzantine dromons protected vital shipments along the Aegean coast. The strategic logic is identical. Concentrate your valuable assets and concentrate your protective force around them. It's a lesson written in the wake of 1,000 ancient galleys, relearned in the 20th century. Even our legal struggle against piracy finds its footing in those old waters. The Roman legal concept of hostis humani generis, the enemy of all mankind, was first applied to pirates. It declared them outside the protection of any state's laws, subject to capture by anyone. This idea that piracy is a universal crime, not tied to a single nation's jurisdiction, became the bedrock of international maritime law. It's the principle that allows a Dutch frigate today to board a suspect skiff in the Gulf of Aden, operating under a United Nations mandate. The courtroom, not just the cannon, became the final weapon in the fight. And the Romans helped draft the first briefs. The dilemmas faced by those ancient admirals are playing out in real time off the coast of Somalia. The challenge of cost. Maintaining a multinational naval task force in those waters is astronomically expensive, just as maintaining the classes strained the Roman treasury. The challenge of effectiveness: do you patrol the vast open ocean, or do you strike the pirate bases on shore, as Pompey did in Cilicia? Modern forces grapple with the same choice. And the profound challenge of justice: what do you do with the young, desperate men you capture? The ancient solution was sometimes brutal execution, sometimes Pompey's model of rehabilitation and resettlement. Today, nations wrestle with legal prosecution, transfer to regional states, addressing the root causes of poverty and instability that drive people to piracy. The script is new, but the moral and strategic questions are ancient. So these fleets were not a historical dead end. They were a prototype, a working model for how a complex society manages a shared, vital, and dangerous space. By studying their forgotten logs, we see the blueprints for our own world. The global commons, the open sea, the internet, even near space, they all present the same eternal problem. How do you foster free exchange and movement while protecting against those who would exploit that openness for chaos or profit? The ancient answer was a sustained, institutional commitment. Not a one-time hero, but a permanent service, a promise written in oak and sail, and now in steel and satellite, that the connections that bind us will be guarded. The quiet hum of a secure trade route is the sound of civilization itself, and it requires, then and now, a dedicated few to keep watch on the horizon. Their legacy isn't in ruins, it's in the world they made possible. The Minoans, they were peacekeepers. They created the first secure trade network. Then there's Pompey. His campaign lasted 3 months. It reshaped Roman politics. These naval armadas, they're forgotten, but they were monumental, more than just fleets. They were engines of economic growth. They turned risky gambles into reliable commerce, and they were instruments of imperial policy, extending the reach of law over the waves, over that chaotic frontier. And they were marvels of logistics and technology. They required a sophistication in supply. In communication, it rivals any ancient wonder. This story is a testament to a struggle, humanity's enduring struggle to secure its connections. Its vital connections across the water, to build corridors of safety in a wilderness, a vast and unpredictable wilderness. That struggle never truly ended. It just changed form. The principles those admirals grappled with: how to project power across great distances, how to balance punishment with prevention, how to pay for a peace that lasts. These questions, they define global security today. So you think about these lost leviathans, these forgotten armadas, and then you consider what we take for granted. The container ship from Shanghai to Los Angeles, the oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, the fiber optic cable on the ocean floor, each one travels in a peace. A peace that was hard-won, purchased by centuries of vigilance, forgotten vigilance, by the quiet, daily work of patrols of protocols, first pioneered by oar and sail. The sea is still the great connector, and the need to guard those connections, to keep the pathways of exchange open and safe, it's as vital now as it was 4,000 years ago. These forgotten armadas remind us, civilization isn't a static achievement. It's a continuous act, an act of maintenance, a promise renewed with each generation, to keep the waves of chaos at bay.